Hey guys, welcome to the How to Make Your Own ARMS Rover version 2 video. We're going to jump into it really quick and move through as quickly as possible. If you want to know how to use the system in general, I recommend watching the other video, Getting to Know ARMS version 2. So if your goal is to get something like this, basically all you need is this and this. This is a really simple setup. It's just 5 conveyors, 2 hydrogen tanks, 2 blocks on each end, and these rotors on each end, plus the 1 rotor in the center. All 3 of the rotors are locked. All 3 of the rotors have a small head attached to them. And so let's just go ahead and build what we would need to in order for you to understand what's required. So to start off, let's just place enough thrusters to cover each direction. Nothing fancy here, just bare bones. Okay, we're gonna need a source of power. 1 battery ought to do it. You're gonna need some wheels, and we'll drop these down 1 level. Actually, we'll do them on the end. Okay, the front of my vehicle is going to be this way, so I have the right wheels selected. Do 3x3s. Okay, now we need a cockpit. Any type is fine. Now let's quickly put the modules on the rover. For this one, we will add a block underneath. We will paste it in the center and make sure the red arrow is pointing toward the front. That being the red arrow, that's our front. Next, we're going to grab the sensor module. And we're going to put 1 at the front. And 1 at the rear. But before we place this one, we need to make 1 change, or a few changes. In this terminal, you're going to replace all the 1s with 2s. The reason we're doing this is to distinguish it from the other sensor module we placed on the front. The one with the number 1 will be the front, the one with the number 2 will be the rear. Okay, so we're going to copy this. Okay, now you'll notice the sensor's working, and also the one up front as well. Keeps track of the player because they're defaulted to that. We're going to grab this right underneath the sensor. This is the control module, or the control panel. Going to add some room for it back here. You can do yours however. This is just a really simple setup. Okay, pretty much have everything we need to attach to it. There is something we can do to the front to help out the sensors. This is going to prevent them from seeing too much. We only want them to be able to see in front of the vehicle in a cone shape. So these blocks are going to serve as a protector. So as you see, the camera is not going to be able to detect us, and that light will turn green, indicating the sensor does not detect any obstacles. We're going to do the same for the back. Okay, we have the back built now as well. It would probably be a good idea to throw an antenna on here. Go ahead, get a gyroscope. And we're also going to need 2 AI blocks attached to this grid. So we're going to have our move, make sure it's oriented properly, and have a basic task. These AI blocks that we just placed will be responsible for the flight mode. These AI blocks here on the tracker will be responsible for pointing towards its target and steering the vehicle in ground mode. The sensors on the front, back, and middle of the vehicle will be responsible for allowing the vehicle to move or stop, hence turning the park on and off. The internal brake sensor here on the control module is responsible for detecting players inside the rover, while the rear and front sensors are responsible for the exterior. The internal sensor is going to form a rectangle around the vehicle, which will allow the player to be within the bounds and have the vehicle remain stationary. It will also detect small or large grids, depending on the configuration you choose. Let's hop in the cockpit and make some adjustments. First thing, go to your hotbar menu, filter by system or sys. You're going to find the timer block system on. I keep that as the 1 key. Timer block system off, I keep that as the 2 key. That's just going to allow you to turn the system on and off. That way you can pilot it or have the automation pilot it. Now we're going to go to our control panel. We're going to make all the groups that are necessary for the timer blocks to properly reference them. Filter by thruster. Call all of these thrusters. It does have to be spelled just as I have it here, or else it's not going to work. Next, we're going to look for the wheels. Same thing here, spelling is important. Now, while we're at the wheels, we're going to back out and we are going to identify the wheels and name them appropriately. So this is the left, front. Okay, now we have all of our wheels named appropriately, front, left, rear, or right. And we're gonna reset all the height offsets. Now we're gonna go back into our control panel, type in AI to filter. You see the AI tracker blocks are already grouped, but these other two that we just built on this rover are not. So we're gonna spell it. Okay. And we can go ahead and configure those because we're going to use this later to test it out. We'll have it set to follow me. The follow distance we'll do 100. And the move, I would recommend keeping this at 5 angles or 5 degrees. That way when it attempts to land, the tilt won't interfere with that. Speed limit 100, minimum altitude, I'd say 20, 25, doesn't really matter. Next, we're going to filter by system again, and we'll start with system on. Go to setup actions. You'll notice this one block here is grayed out. That is the rotor tracker base. So filter by tracker. There it is, rotor tracker base. We're going to be turning that on. So toggle block on. Next page, you'll notice these 4 blocks are empty here. These relate to wheels and some inversions that we have to do. So the first is the left rear. So we find left rear, and we are going to invert steering on and off. Not steering on and off, but invert steering on and off. We're going to do the same thing with right rear. Invert steering on off. And then the right front, we're going to invert propulsion on and off. And then with the right rear, we're going to invert propulsion on and off. Okay, next, we're going to go to system off. We're going to do pretty much the same thing here as we did with the wheels. So filter again by wheel. So to summarize again for this one, we have left rear, invert steering on and off. Right rear, invert steering on off. Right front, invert propulsion on off. Right rear, invert propulsion on off. Next, we're going to go to the system calibrator. Here is the rotor tracker base. So filter by tracker base. We're going to be turning that off. Next, you're going to filter by the word sensor forward, setup action. Type in FWD for forward drive. Trigger now. Sensor left. Type in LT1. Trigger now on the first slot. LT2, trigger now on the second slot. Reverse, same thing with the forward drive except RV. So RV drive, trigger now. Right, setup action, RT, RT1, trigger now, RT2, trigger now. Now we are going to filter by park. You have timer block park off and on, so start with the on, setup actions. You'll notice this one grayed block right here. You will look for the cockpit that you have and park on off. Back out, go to park off, setup actions, same thing, cockpit, park on off. Next, filter by ABS. I don't know if this accurately represents what the ABS brake system does, but all this basically is responsible for is when the rover goes into park mode, the front wheels will not lock up until about 2 seconds. That way it prevents any dramatic tilting forward while it's braking at high speeds. So go into the ABS repeater, setup actions, and we have to go to all the front wheels. So type in front, so wheel left front. We're going to first allow parking brake on off, and then same thing for the right front, allow parking brake on off, and then for the wheel left front, propulsion on off, wheel right front, propulsion on off. Next, filter by the event controller. We are looking for the air mode. You're going to want to scroll down and look for the hinge that's attached to the tracker. Add block, you should see it there. Now go to park regulator. We're going to look for the light panel from the sensor module, number 1, which is our front. Light panel from the sensor module number 2, which is the rear. And then we're going to look for the internal one. Oh, never mind, it's already here. And that should be all we need for a functioning arms rover. Let's take it to the ground and see if there's anything we missed. Okay, we're at the ground. We're going to paste our grid. Alright. Enter into the cockpit. Something else I like to do with these is keep the thrusters hotkey. You can turn this on and off. Also the AI blocks. Main, be able to shut those on and off, and also the tracker blocks. That way if you ever have any problems, you can quickly turn it off. Alright, so let's drop down. We're going to set the park on. At the control panel, we're going to make sure that park on is red, which means it's currently activated. We did just lock the parking, so that should match. You can see we are currently set to brake for players and not for small grids or large grids. If we were to trigger this on, then large grids would be eligible for the sensors in the front, back, and center to detect, and if they were detected, the vehicle would brake, and if none are detected, then the vehicle would continue. Okay, now that we have it set to follow players, which is me in this case, we're going to go ahead and turn on the system and make sure everything's functioning properly, and I just clicked both buttons accidentally. Alright, so I've pressed 1, we're going to leave, make sure this is following me, and it is. You'll see the wheels should turn appropriately depending on which direction we're facing. Okay, and just so you know, this is currently configured as far as speed and turning radius for larger vehicles, or it's meant to follow larger vehicles, but it will work on the player, so it's the behavior of it is going to be a little bit too fast than what you would maybe want if you were walking with it behind you. So it take off within 3 seconds of detecting no obstacles, and it should stop, I think, at 200 meters is when the brake, or 100. I need to fix that. We want to adjust the turret controller's distance that it begins to stop at. Put it at 200. This is a bit optimal for these vehicles because they're going to be moving so fast. Alright, so let's back up. We're going to pass up 200 meters As you can see, right about now, it's going to kick in and within 3 seconds of detecting no target. Okay, and there it goes and brakes again. So you can see it happening all around 200 meters. So let's back up, let it gain some speed, and we'll ask it to turn as well a little bit. And we should see the ABS kick in. It's going to brake, and then 2 seconds later, the front wheels lock. All right. And of course, you can always check to make sure reverse is working. It's going to turn and try to face you. But the front sensors are probably going to see me, and the vehicle's just going to come to a stop. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we can test out the flight mode now. So all we need to do is fly up above 30 degrees. Well, 30 degrees relative to that hinge down there. We are, so it should kick into air mode. There it goes. And remember from the other video that in order to land, in order for ground mode to be active, you have to surpass the 100 meter mark, which is currently set for the initiate ground mode event controller. We'll look at those details in a bit. Basically what that means is once it starts flying, you need to go above 100 meters. That way when it comes back down, that event controller would have been reset, and if 100 meters is detected again, which it just was, it will fall. Okay, now we're going to test and see if the ramp feature is working, which basically just tells the vehicle to go into flight mode if it ramps off, you know, something pretty drastic. Hopefully this is drastic enough. I think I have it set to 35 meters altitude. If that continues for a couple seconds, then it should activate air mode. There it goes. Kind of hit there. So this is kind of a shallow hill. So you can change that if you want to, make it more or less sensitive, but it did activate. Okay, last thing that we're going to go over is a little bit more detail on each of these blocks, how they work. So the top left here is the system on. Basically it's going to be green if the system is not on. What this means is this block can be called because it's on. That's when you're in the cockpit and you toggle one on, this block is going to be execute, and then it's going to turn itself off. Then it's going to turn the system off block on, so the system can then be turned off. I would advise against messing with any of the settings within either of those two blocks as they stand. The same thing with the calibrator. We've already been over the player brakes. Each of those are responsible for turning their respective sensors to a mode that allows for its particular type to be followed. So if we trigger that on, we trigger this on, you can see that they're all activated. So large, small grids and the player would cause this vehicle to stop if detected at this current state. These 6 gray blocks right here all have to do with the drive system. The park regulator event controller basically looks to see if all of the sensor lights are green. If they are green, or lit rather, then the system is going to release the park and continue on towards whatever it's pointing at. The park on is just turns the parking on, and same thing with the park off. Wouldn't mess with those settings. These two bottom center ones are the forward drive and reverse drive. We can look at those settings real quick. You can filter by drive, and this is something you're going to need to know if you want to adjust how fast the vehicle goes. So you go to setup actions, and what you'll notice here is we have a lot of wheel controls. So the first 2 options here are going to invert the propulsion, and it's going to invert the steering of all the wheels, because if you're going forward, you want the propulsion to go one way, and if you're going reverse, you want it the other way. Same thing with steering. Next, we have the wheel speed limit being reset. This will turn it to 180 in all cases when it's triggered. And then we have the wheel maximum speed limit incrementing by 1. And you'll notice on each page after this, page 2, it gets incremented again. Page 3, it gets incremented again. And this goes on until as many times as you like, so you can add more increments on each page to make the vehicle go faster forward if you like, or slower by taking the triggers off the slots. The last page here, something important happens. The timer block reverse drive gets turned on so that reverse can now be triggered, and the forward drive block, which is what we're currently looking at the settings for, gets turned off so it doesn't get called again and all these settings get reapplied. Okay, backing out, go into the reverse drive. Pretty much the same rule here. I do have the standard to where the reverse only gets incremented a couple slots usually, and that way it doesn't back up really fast. All right, next you have the LT1, LT2. This is for left turn 1, left turn 2, and respectively right turn 1, right turn 2. Similarly, these blocks are responsible for setting the turning of the vehicle while driving. LT1 is left turn 1. It basically decreasing the steer override on all the wheels. And again, we only call it a few times here so you can add more tabs. This should be the last block that's called. So if you want more tabs, you're going to need to move this block all the way to that page, or just put it on the end of page 0. LT2 is only responsible for resetting the turning. So if you're in left turn mode and then it straightens up, then all the steering is going to get reset, and LT1 is going to get turned back on so the left turn can then be called again. And remember, the forward and reverse drive are triggered by the sensors here. This is what triggers reverse, and this is what triggers forward. And then on the right side, the RT1 and RT2, and on the left side, LT1 and LT2. These two orange blocks are the ABS braking system. Again, I'm not sure if this correlates to the way ABS brakes work in real life, but what these do, they're responsible for causing the wheels to not lock up so quickly so the vehicle doesn't flip forward. You can play around with the increments if you like. If the only limitation I would put is when you look for the ABS repeater, or excuse me, the delay, you're going to want to make sure this number here is in increments of 2, because this repeater is going to get called every second for a duration of however long you have here. So it's going to get turned off and then back on. And when the final iteration that it goes through, you want it to be on. So bottom line, if you want to make any changes to the ABS, make sure that this number here is an increment of 2, with 2 being the lowest. And I wouldn't put it past 6 or even 8, but 4 seems good to me. So you can mess around with that if you like. Okay, these 3 event controllers and these 2 orange blocks are all involved in automatic ground or air mode detection. The top block is the air mode ramp detector. So if we filter by event controller in our control panel, we can look at air mode first. Air mode is an event controller, and here's where the threshold for this -30 degrees is set against our hinge tracker. So in other words, this hinge right here, which the tracker is on and pointing toward its target, if the tracker is looking up -30 degrees relative to that hinge, that event controller is going to detect that and then initiate the air mode by calling initiate air mode. We'll look at that. So filter by air mode, initiate air mode. We have a 3-second delay. So what that means is that the hinge is going to have to be looking 30 degrees upward for at least 3 seconds before the air mode will get initiated. Again, this is a setting you can change. Looking at the air mode ramp event controller, this is the event controller that regulates the air mode getting initiated if the rover ramps. And so you can see the altitude setting here is 20. So if this rover were to exceed 20 meters altitude, it would then switch into the initialize air mode timer. And I believe it's a trigger now. No, it's a start, so it needs at least 3 seconds. Looking in detail at the initiate air mode, you can see that the thrusters are turned on, the AI main blocks are turned on, and the initiate ground mode is toggled on. That way, the initiate ground mode can now be called. Speaking of ground mode, let's take a look at its event controller. It has an altitude setting of 100, and so if the altitude is equal to or less than 100, then the initiate ground mode is going to start. And here you can see why you have to clear 100 meters after switching into ground mode for this event controller to register, because once you land, you're in this mode, and it's not going to switch back to false. It's going to be true until you leave that again. We could have put some more fancy logic in here to reset it automatically, but I'm trying to keep this system as PCU friendly as possible, so feel free to add your own in there. Looking at the initiate ground mode, there's a 5-second delay there, so that means that once this triggers, you have 5 seconds until this block gets executed, and what it does is it turns the AI blocks off and the thrusters off. Down here we have our sensor, and the block that this sensor is sitting on is itself actually a light. So right now it's set to detect players, but if I were to turn that off, you can see the light will turn on. You might notice the green there behind there, so it is on. And guys, that's it. You now have instructions on how to make your own rover. Please let me know if you have any questions. The link to my Discord is in the video description.